Good evening, everybody. My name is Ben Emlyn-Jones, and I am at the Bricklayers Arms in High Wycombe. I'm here to speak at the High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup Group. I'm holding a painting here by Neil Geddes Ward called Flying Saucer Over a Desert. And, well, I'm here to talk about flying saucers too. This is the image you usually associate with flying saucers. You associate them flying over New Mexico or somewhere covered in cactus and brush. Well, I'm here to talk about flying saucers flying over green fields and dense forests, because I'm here to talk about UFOs from the United Kingdom. Less well-known cases, but I think equally important. It's Kingdom of UFOs.
Thank you very much indeed, everyone, for coming to High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup Group. It's good to see new faces here, actually. It's very good. We'll be taking names and numbers later. That's to make sure you come back next time. So I'm Neil, and I run this little motley crew of fanatics, or whatever you want to call us. And this is a familiar face to some of you, because he's been here many times before, and you've perhaps seen quite a few of his videos on YouTube. And if you follow him, you're known as Ben Emlyn-Jones. Hospital Portals Against the New World Order, which he runs as well, and he does his little blogs and things like that, and is always making his films as well of his trips around the UK, where he speaks to various groups and organisations. So Ben has kindly agreed to come and do a talk which he did originally in Denmark earlier this year. It was very, very cold and bitter winter in Denmark in February, I think.
Yeah, it was.
So at least we can give a slightly warmer welcome in the sense of the word. So how it works is that Ben will talk for about an hour roughly. Yeah, we'll take a break and then he can resume the second part of the talk. If there's more to talk about, we'll take questions. And at the very end, we just ask a contribution from everyone of £5 each to cover Ben's expenses. So
you keep time for us, Neil. You'll keep time for us.
Yeah, I will keep time. So by the time, hopefully by the end, it'll be driving away in a Rolls Royce, because it's quite good tonight. So anyway, hands together for Ben Emlyn-Jones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and it's great to be back here again. This is a really, really good group we got here, and this room has transformed slightly since I was here last. It's still looking very stylish. I recognise some of you, and again, met some new people tonight. As you just heard, my name is Ben Emlyn-Jones, and this is where you can find out more about me. HPANWO stands for Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. And that's basically my website, which includes several blogs, the YouTube channel, my radio show that I do, and also some fictional work that I do, which I've published online. And then I'll tell you more about my fictional work at the end. But if you want to know more about me, that's the place to go. The main site is also a portal to all the other websites. It's very extensive, and I've been doing that for years. So there's a massive amount of material on there. Right. This was me, the portering Buddha. I was a hospital porter for 23 years. I'm not anymore though, I'm now an ex-hospital porter. And the story of how I became an ex-hospital porter it's interesting and it's worrying, because it involves the fact that people like us are persecuted for our employment. I'm one of many people who suffered career-wise as a result of my interest in the subjects I'm going to talk about tonight. So it's something to be wary of, I think. It really is. That's a long story, but I'll tell you it another day maybe. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is UFOs about a particular country. And it makes it easier the fact we're actually in the country we're talking about, because it is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, this little country, of course, we live in England. We are in England. But this country, for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure most of you do, but some people watching this might not, it's actually it's four countries in one. It is a federation or union of four separate countries, and these are constituent nations of the United Kingdom. We have England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Each of these countries is a little bit different. They have their own languages, some of their own cultures, but of course you could speak English anywhere in them, of course, and they have certain things in common. Now, interestingly, this little group of islands, the British Isles, United Kingdom in particular, has a very, very rich paranormal presence. In fact, more so than anywhere else in the world. And the ufological aspect of that is no exception. And in fact, Wales, I'm going to be talking to you about a case from Wales today. Wales in particular, just a little country, second smallest after Northern Ireland, has the lion's share of the best UFO cases, actually. And I come from Wales myself, so I'm very proud of that. Now, the history of ufology in Britain, really, it matches that of many other places. And that is really, this was a phenomenon that's always existed, but it was really the modern age of ufology and the concept of UFOs really can be traced to about the 1940s. And this here, you might recognise him as Winston Churchill, who was one of our most famous prime ministers, wartime prime minister. And that above him, you see, is a flying saucer. Now, I should point out that this is not an actual picture of a flying saucer above Winston Churchill. This is a composite image. I'll be showing you the image behind it later on. But the image of the flying saucer, I believe, is real. It's an old picture, and I think that's probably a real image of a UFO. But old Winnie, he was very, very keen on the idea of extraterrestrial life, and he took a keen interest in UFOs. He set up the Flying Saucer Working Party. Now, this goes back a long way. I mean, the first documents, the first documented proof that this organisation existed date back to 1952. But there's evidence to suggest it's older, and it might date back a decade or more before then. Now, this is stuff that's recently been declassified, actually. But Churchill set up a group of people within the government to actually investigate the UFO phenomenon. Well, they didn't use the term UFO, but the term flying saucer came about in the late 1940s. UFO dates back to the era of Project Blue Book, Captain Repult. But what they discovered was interesting, because they discovered that what people were seeing, and there were reports of what's known as Foo Fighters in World War II. This was RAF crews, RAF aircraft pilots were seeing strange objects accompanying them on missions. Funnily enough, the Germans were seeing the same thing, and the Americans saw it too, and they thought it might be a secret weapon or something from the other side. But it turns out that both sides were seeing the same thing. Now, these Foo Fighters were taken very, very seriously. And the idea was that if anything is interfering with flight operations, and of course it is a threat. And of course they took this seriously because they believed it was real. The pilots believed it was real, and the authorities believed them. Interestingly, the conclusion of one of the 1952 meetings was a proposal by Winston Churchill himself, who suggested that the subject, that is, the findings of any investigation, should be classified for a period of no shorter than 50 years. And the reason he said this is because he was keen to avoid public panic. Now, this is really amazing when you consider this man's history, the fact that he led Britain through World War II. Now, the British people coped with World War II with a lot of stoicism and a lot of courage. We had to face all kinds of things. We had to, a lot of our sons and our brothers and husbands and fathers were sent off to die in foreign fields in conflict. Those who were left behind had to face with the Blitz and with rationing. Now, the British people did not panic during that period. They kept calm and carried on, as the posters said. This shows that the British public would not panic in such a situation. So I've got to ask myself why Churchill thought that we would panic if faced with the truth about reality of UFOs. He obviously thought this was something more frightening than World War II. That's pretty scary, must admit. Funnily enough, in the modern truth embargo, there were people involved in it who say essentially the same thing. They're not interested in covering up any free energy or anything like that. They just think, well, there'd be public panic if people knew about this. And I think there's it shows generally in government among the state, the individuals within the state, they have a very low opinion of the general population, and they regard us with an awful lot of contempt. believe people would panic in that situation. People don't panic as often as the government think we're going to panic. But it just shows how they look down their nose at us. This kind of, whenever they say that, they go, oh, people will panic, people will panic. Yeah, that shows that they don't think much of us, doesn't it? Now, we come forward a little few years after the Flying Saucer Working Party. We have Secretariat AS2 at the Ministry of Defence, and this was run most famously by this character. Do you recognise him? It is the one and only Nick Pope. The man you cannot have a UFO conference without inviting. Well, you can now, but he used to be hot property. He used to appear at every single conference. Now he only appears at a few because he's kind of burned his bridges a bit with British ufology. This man was in the Ministry of Defence. He actually manned the UFO reporting desk for several years, and this was what made him famous. Since then, he's gone on to become a freelance journalist, but he was very much, for many, many years, when he was in the MOD and also afterwards, he was the Mr. UFO of the media. He was the guy you had on speed dial when, on the rare occasions, the media actually wanted to do a serious news report about UFOs, and even those so-called serious reports were less than completely serious. And this was the chap that used to get him on the show, and he'd be presenting his case. Now, he's a person that I don't particularly trust, and a lot of people, there's good reasons not to trust this chap. It's not my intention to go into the kind of ins and outs of that. I just wanted to say that there's reason to be suspicious of this guy's motives. I mean, he has many catchphrases like, "We can't rule it out." Yeah, that's one of his favourites. He said, "I can neither confirm nor deny this." So he's always been very sort of equivocal over the whole idea of the ET hypothesis. Now, he's been replaced, incidentally, by a guy called Dr. David Clarke. Has anyone heard of him? He's a full debunker. He's the guy you bring onto the skeptic meetings. High Wycombe skeptics in the pub, no doubt, have him on their list. If you want to go and see him, no doubt he'll show his face in this town at some point. Now, this is a person who's a far more admirable character than Nick Pope. This is Admiral of the Fleet, Sir Peter Horsley. Now, this is a guy who's, well, you know what they say about ufologists. The official view, or the popular view of ufologists, is we're all kind of nutty, aren't we? We're all losers. We're guys in anoraks and tinfoil hats. We stand on hillsides with cameras pointing at the sky in Wellington boots. You know, we're not all there. Well, this guy was, well, firstly, he commanded a battleship and an entire fleet during World War II. He later went on to become Chief of the Defence Staff, so which is basically the entire head of the Royal Navy, the entire head of and chairman of the committee of all the armed forces leaders. He was also on the organising committee of NATO, which included dealing with Britain's and America's nuclear deterrent. That's not the kind of job anyone can apply for. No one would be considered for that post unless you were completely sound of mind and your mental health was not in question. This guy took the idea of UFOs very seriously indeed. He brought it up in the House of Lords many times. I consider him a hero of the UFO movement. And it's a shame. He disagreed with Nick Pope many, many times, and he did work with him. But I think this guy was much more open-minded. So, when you think about UFOs in Britain, we almost always come back to this case, the Rendlesham Forest incident of Christmas 1980. It's by far and away the most famous of Britain's ufological cases. In fact, if you go anywhere in the world, people will say, Britain, UFO, they'll say Rendlesham Forest. This is one of the most important UFO incidents, in fact, in the entire world. I'm not going to dwell on this, actually, because really enough has been said about this in other talks. I'm here to talk about less well-known cases, which I think are equally important. Just to say, the research into this event is still going on. There's a lot of controversy that needs to be cleared up, and I think it is being cleared up now. In fact, there's a new film coming out pretty soon called Capel Green, which is all about this. So do watch out for that, because that'll be coming probably to cinemas. It won't just be on TV or on DVD. It'll be in a couple of cinemas too. That's a documentary about this incident. Another thing you always think about with this country and UFOs is crop circles. Now, crop circles are a worldwide phenomenon, but they are focused in England, especially on the west country of England, the Wiltshire, Somerset area. This is really the heartland of the world crop circle phenomenon. Now, these have been appearing in fields for as long as we can remember. I mean, there's a one from the 16th century, which the mowing devil image of Hertfordshire. However, in the 20th century, these really took off from the 1970s onwards, really. Now, I know a lot of them are made by people. I know that. I know some people who make them. And it's interesting, though, that you get these guys around the table, these plankers as they're known, you know, get talking to them, and they will not admit that most of them will not admit. Some of them will pretend to, but most of them will admit that their own activity just cannot account for the whole phenomenon. They will say crop circles appears that they can't account for. Also, some of them lie outright. I mean, I've known situations where two separate teams will own up for the same circle, which is not possible. Either one of them are lying or both of them are lying. So there is a genuine phenomenon behind this. Indeed, David Caton and Richard D. Hall have done investigations into this, which prove that some of these do appear spontaneously by means unknown. And they are connected to UFOs. A lot of these do appear in conjunction with certain kinds of UFO. So it looks like whatever's causing this is connected to the UFO phenomenon. Now I'm going to take you back to 1952 to a not very well known UFO event, but I think it's very significant. It's called the Little Rissington UFO incident. It happened in October of 1952. There were two pilots aboard a Meteor jet, an RAF Meteor training aircraft. One of them was called Flight Lieutenant Richard Swinney. The other guy was called Lieutenant David Crofts. He was in the Royal Navy, and he was the trainee. He was being trained to be a pilot by Swinney. They were flying near Little Rissington, which is an air base. And this is not actually a photograph. This is a reconstruction of what they saw. They looked out the cockpit, and they saw three white, oval-shaped objects ahead of them. And they thought, the first thought, they were parachutes. There was three guys on parachutes. And so they immediately banked the aircraft to get out of the way, so to avoid colliding with these parachutes, with the people on them. But guess what? The objects moved, followed the aircraft. And then they knew something really weird was going on. So they reported this, they watched them for a couple of minutes, and they looked away for a second, and they looked back, and they'd vanished. They just vanished into thin air. Either that or they'd sped off so quickly that no one could see where they went. When they got back to the ground, they made a report. This is a photocopy of Flight Lieutenant Swinney's real logbook. You see that says 1952, and there's the date, October the 26th, and it says there, look, do you see where it says saucers, exclamation point there? Exclamation mark, saucers. He's actually written it in his logbook because he's so astonished by what he's seen. It's still unknown, and we don't know what the explanation is for this. We really don't. But Swinney was interviewed for a TV documentary in the 90s. Now an elderly man. He stands by what he saw. He still maintains that what he saw was real. Not only that, something very strange happened. When they got back down to the ground, they reported the event, they were immediately confined to quarters. They were not allowed to go to the mess for the meals. All their food was brought to them in their rooms, in their bedrooms. And then some guys in suits turned up and interviewed them very abrasively and aggressively for a certain amount of time, demanding to know what they saw, saying again and again, what did you see, over and over again. This happens a lot with UFO witnesses. And it indicates to me that the government were already engaged in a cover-up as long ago as 1952. And that would fit in with what we know from the Flying Saucer Working Party, chaired by Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister. We know that because he did recommend a cover-up back then. Now, how many of you seen this photo before? It is quite well known, actually, but it's still an important case that's not as well known as it should be. It is a British case. This is from Cumbria. Now, this photograph was taken on the 25th of May 1964 at Borough Marsh, which is in Cumbria. It's on the Solway Firth near the border with Scotland. This little girl is called Elizabeth Templeton. Now, her father's called Jim Templeton. He was the photographer. And his wife, Elizabeth's mother, Annie, they went out for a picnic on Borough Marsh, which is a kind of like a green area. It's a beauty spot. And Templeton's a keen amateur photographer, so he took his camera out and started doing some pictures of Elizabeth, in various poses. Told her to hold a posy of flowers, and he took these photographs of her. And he took 3 photographs. This particular was a set of 3 he took, where he altered the settings of the camera slightly between each shot. But he took them all within a few seconds of each other. And he took them to the chemist shop and had them developed. And anyone younger than me, you know, that's what you have to do in those days. I mean, now you can't just post them on Facebook now. You have to actually take real film into the chemist shop, and the chemist would develop them for you and give you prints. And the guy at the chemist said, he said, well, that's pretty good. He said, very nice. Shame the guy in the beekeeper suit spoiled one of the shots. And Jim said, what do you mean? He says, look, the funny thing is, the first shot was like that, but there was nothing there. Third one, nothing there. The second one, and look what's there. Look what's standing behind her. Some kind of thing in a white suit.
It reminds me of the Stig. The Stig went back in time.
The what, sorry?
The Stig from Top Gear went back in time.
Oh, right. Yeah. It's a weird thing, actually. This is a close-up of it here. Now, Jim Templeton's been accused of faking this. I mean, what he did was he took it to Kodak, and Kodak said this is real. They're so sure it's real, they've offered a lifetime supply of film to anyone who can prove otherwise. And I don't think he faked this. If this was some kind of composite image, it would have a huge layering problem, because if you look at Elizabeth's hair, there's little strands coming up from her crown which loop over, and there's actually a gap underneath between that and the rest of her head. You can see quite clearly that they overlap the entity standing behind her. Now, if this is a fake, that would be very difficult to fake. You'd have a huge layering problem, because you can see quite clearly, even below the little strand, you can see the entity's body straight through it. That's why I think this is real. The entity itself is weird. It's vaguely humanoid. Its head appears to be covered by something. Now that looks maybe like a visor of a helmet or something. It does look a bit like a beekeeper's suit. But look at the arm. Now, because the front of it doesn't look like a chest, but the arm is like pointed backwards. The arm looks like it's pointed backwards. It reminds me of that painting, The Son of Man. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a painting of a man with a bowler hat with an apple in front of his face. It's quite famous. And you see the same thing, that one of the arms is backwards for some reason. So unless that's the back of the creature, we don't know. Now, several skeptics have got onto this. Templeton was accused of faking it. And when they realised they couldn't fake it, they started to come up with other explanations. They said, oh, that was just someone who walked in front of the camera. And one of the people they blamed was Annie, Elizabeth's mother. His own wife had walked in front of the camera while he was taking the shot. Now, Templeton and Elizabeth deny this, because Templeton was actually, he had the camera with him. He was looking through the viewfinder. He was taking the photographs very quickly, one after the other. You only see the figure in one of the shots, the second shot. He also said that Annie was sitting beside him, out of frame. She wanted to keep out of the way while they were doing the photos. Another thing about it is, this actual creature, whatever it is, you can see it's leaning over quite considerably. It's like that. And if you do that, you'll fall over. If you try to stand in that posture, you will fall over. And not only that, but it's been worked out that the creature is not only leaning over, it's actually hovering 1.5 feet in the air. It's not touching the ground, it's actually floating in the air. Very strange, isn't it? Now, interesting coincidence. If you look just behind, go back a bit. Whoops. What's happening? What's happening? There we go. If you look just to the right of or the left or right of Elizabeth's head there, you see a little dome-shaped building. That's the Windscale nuclear power plant in Cumbria, today called Sellafield. And that is where they were involved in nuclear weapons research in the 60s. In 1964, at Woomera in Australia, this was tested. This is the Blue Streak missile. It's a British intercontinental ballistic missile, which was actually tried out before they just adopted the American systems. Polaris, Trident, etc. We ended up not having a land-based nuclear deterrent. But this is, you see here this missile being tested at the test range. There's two guys in white suits there. Right, this is not a photograph of anything strange. These guys are just technicians. And what happened was they were doing a test, and as always when they do a test, they have to make sure everyone is away from the rocket, because when they're testing the engines, if anyone was hanging around, they'd be burnt by the rocket exhaust. So basically, they did a head count to make sure everyone was a long way off, and then they fired the rocket's engines. Now, just before they were about to fire the rocket's engines, someone spotted a guy in a white suit wandering around on the launch pad. And so they immediately cancelled the test. They thought some idiot had stayed around near the rocket and we told everyone to get out of the way, but it wasn't. They did the head count, it was correct. All the technicians, all the staff members, all the scientists and engineers, they were out of the way as they should be. So when they went and investigated, the guy with the white suit had gone. But guess what? the time that happened was, that you take into account time differences. This is on the other side of the world. It was the exact same moment that photograph was taken over in Cumbria, where the Blue Street missile was developed. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. The family stand by their story. That there is a photograph taken in 2014, the 50th anniversary of the event. This is shortly before Jim died. You see Jim there, and there's little Elizabeth, she's a big girl now, obviously, holding the picture of herself as a child. The family stand by their story now. What's more, something else strange happened. When he got back from the chemist shop, he actually called the newspapers, and this became actually, for a short time, this was like headline news. And Jim had a visit from some very strange people, guys in dark suits, and they demanded to know. They said they were government agents, but they didn't say what their names were. They didn't show any ID cards. They just referred to each other as number 1 and number 2, these two guys. They had a big black car, and they demanded that Jim show them where he had his encounter. And so Jim got in the back of the car, and they drove into Brough Marsh. They got out and he showed them where they were. They became very angry. They kept asking him questions and they kept demanding. They were very aggressive, and Jim found them very intimidating. And then they asked something very, very strange. They said to him, Jim, where did you see the second alien? They did use the word alien. There was no second alien. There was only one. There was no entity. Jim said, what are you talking about? I didn't see anything. It only appeared on the photograph, and there was only one of them. And in the end, they got very angry, and they drove off and left him there. And he had to walk to the nearest bus stop, and it was 10 miles from home. He lives in Carlisle. He had to get the bus home. But I must point out that this was long before the concept of the Men in Black was popular in our culture. This was long before John Keel, for example, published his famous book. This was a few years before that. I think it was 69 or 70 that John Keel came out with his book about Men in Black. Nick Redfern wasn't even born then. And he certainly hadn't written his book about Men in Black. But what Jim actually experienced was an actual full-blown typical Men in Black encounter that many UFO close encounter witnesses have experienced. Very strange, that. Very strange indeed. Especially when they demanded to know about the second alien. What second alien? Well, there was another one in Australia, wasn't there? Now, there's a bit of a small slide here. This guy's called Mike Soper, and he lives near me in Oxford. He lives in Wheatley, which is near Oxford, and he runs Contact International, which is actually one of the oldest UFO groups in the world. And he has talked about a very interesting case of a guy he actually lives in Oxford, where I live, or used to. He may be dead now, but he's known as David Mann. And it's David Mann. I mean, it's about as common a name as you can get. And the reason is that's not his real name. David Mann has guarded his anonymity very closely and very carefully. Skeptics say that we're all just doing this to draw attention to ourselves, to become famous. Well, I can tell you for now that that's the last thing Mr. Mann wants. His experience happened in 1977, and it happened near Farringdon. I don't know how familiar you are with Oxfordshire, but this is just west of Oxford. He was actually driving from Gloucester to Oxford late at night. It was 9 p.m. Now that drive should take you about maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on the traffic. At that time of night, it wouldn't have taken longer than an hour and a half. But he was driving from Gloucester, and you go past Farringdon on the road, the main road between the two places. For some reason, he took a detour down one of the smaller roads. And when he got home, he realised they left the place at 8 p.m. and it was midnight when they got home. So they had missing time. Now, over the next few days, the memory slowly returned. It was him, his wife, and his 2 kids were in the car. What happened was he was driving on this road near Farringdon, and he suddenly felt like he kept seeing the same things go past the car on either side, as if he was on some kind. He suddenly strayed onto a racing circuit of some kind. And then he looked. Then the car's engine stopped automatically, and he saw in the field nearby there was a huge flying saucer, about 100 feet across. Although when he went inside, it was even 100 feet is not very big. On the inside, it was much bigger than it should have been, like Doctor Who's TARDIS. It seems to be bigger on the inside, which often happens with UFOs when people go aboard flying saucers. Now, when Mr. Mann, his wife and 2 kids went aboard, there were some creatures there that were vaguely humanoid. They looked like Nordics. They had blonde hair, blue eyes. They looked quite human, except their eyes were too big and too far apart. But apart from that, he said they were like normal humans. And they showed him around, and they communicated telepathically to him and his family. Now, the children were taken away, and they were given medical examinations. The husband and wife, Mr. Mann and his wife, were shown the engine room, and the captain, the creature they called the captain, because he seemed to be in command, he said that the engines work like on what they called natural force energies, natural force engines, and they looked like they had big levers, like something in a signal box. They didn't look very high tech. But the alien warned Mr. Mann. He said, "You mustn't use nuclear power, and you mustn't use nuclear weapons, because these are things very damaging to the Earth." That's another common feature of contact experiences, where you're given messages to do with environmental destruction and war and things like that. And basically, they were then reunited with the children, and they were released. And now Mr. Mann, whoever he really is, has been very, very careful to keep his identity secret, because he's a teacher. He's actually a professor at what used to be called then the Oxford Polytechnic. It's now Oxford Brookes University. Mike knows who this guy is, but no one else does. And he will not reveal his identity if he's even still alive. Or I don't know, maybe his children are still around. I don't know them, and they're keeping quiet. But Mike is absolutely convinced this guy's telling the truth. So that's a not very well-known case. It's from Oxfordshire. It's from the Emerald of the South, where I live. But I thought it's a very important one. Now we're going to come on to the Pentre UFO incident. This is something that I talked about in Denmark it was the first time it was ever spoken about outside the UK. But a week before I left, I had a strange phone call from somebody. I have an ex-directory landline at my home. I had a phone call from somebody whose voice I didn't recognise, who warned me, or didn't warn me exactly, but suggested it would be a bad idea to talk about this event. And then they put the phone down. I've got no idea who they were. I phoned up the telecom company. They said, they just sent me some information back about nuisance calls, and that was it. Now, this is an amazing event that took place in South Wales in 2016, in February 2016. So this is actually a recent case, and unlike many UFO events, research into it began straight away. A field researcher immediately got on the case, and work began straight away. These are the two really important people in this case. That's Gary Jones and Kaz Clark. Gary Jones is a field researcher. He used to be with the Swansea UFO Network. He now works independently. Kaz Clark is the principal witness to this event and was the first one to come forward. So far, she's the only one to speak publicly about this. But she's done so in great detail. She's very eloquent, and she's a good talker, and she described exactly what she saw. This is actually me interviewing Kaz. Now, this is actually in Pentre. Pentre is a small village in South Wales, a few miles north of the capital, Cardiff. And I actually travelled, I've been there twice actually, and as you can see here, I'm interviewing Kaz for a video documentary I made about the series. Now, she's standing at a gate. Now what happened was, it's very strange because, as again sometimes happens with UFOs, the appearance of the UFO was preceded by a large amount of air traffic, normal air traffic, more than usual. That is military air traffic. There were several aircraft flying above for several days before this event happened. One of them has been confirmed as an RAF reconnaissance aircraft. There were several others, a large number, and they weren't just going around Pentre. They weren't circling over Pentre. They were flying all over South Wales and across the Bristol Channel into the southwest as well, into Devon and Cornwall and Somerset. That's very strange indeed. It indicates that the government had some inkling that something was going to happen. They didn't know the exact spot, but they knew the region to within a few hundred miles where something strange was going to happen. And they moved air reconnaissance aircraft to the area to check it out beforehand. Now, this was a major irritant to people. People in Pentre couldn't sleep because of the noise of aircraft flying overhead the whole time. They reported to the police didn't know. They called the Ministry of Defence. The Ministry of Defence denied it. Anyway, it was a Thursday night in February 2016, and the fact that everyone was gathered in someone's garden, they were looking at the sky because they couldn't sleep because of this noise. They saw a red light appear in the sky, and they ran out of Kaz's house up to this gate here. Here's another picture of the gate here, looking in the other direction. There's me and Kaz there. And what happened then was more and more lights appeared, and then a large brown or black triangle or pyramid-shaped object appeared. in the sky. And it appeared just basically where we're looking now in the sky. And it had multicolored lights coming out of it, like strange objects, and some of them came really close. They were like barrel-shaped objects about the size of a car. Some were red, some were green, and they kept changing colours. One hovered over a hedge there, and the other hovered over the tree, you see, to the right. And Kaz, strange enough, she waved it. She said hello. She waved it and said hello. And when she described that, that's a very sort of, that kind of anecdote, I think, gives her story credence. And I do believe her. She's very, very sincere. What's more, she's passed 3 polygraph tests, which she arranged herself. To me, that indicates she was willing to put herself to the test. Let's see that UFO activity area. Gary did that. That's on the gate post. There's another one. It's worth doing this, actually. See, the Pentre incident. It's worth doing this, and he's decided to mark that area with these little badges, just to put it all on the map. It's not. It's. I mean, they do that at Roswell and other places. They do this. They've got a Rendlesham Forest UFO trail as well. It's always a good idea. There's another view of the field from where this large triangular or pyramid-shaped object just appeared. Now, there's lots of strange things. Other strange things were there was what looked like lightning coming out of the bottom of it that's connecting to the ground. That's what it's described as, and the actual place where the lightning touched the ground was very, very interesting. I say lightning, it looked like an electrical discharge. I mean, I don't believe that's what it was, because there's no sign of burning, which you get, or heat effects, which you get with a large electrical discharge. But it was something that looked like lightning coming out of the bottom of the craft. Now this is Gary here pointing at one of the hedges, the hedge at the side, to the left of the gate, and you can see some of it's dead. I mean, I went there in November. It's harder to see. If you go there, it's like in the summer when there's foliage, you see it a lot more clearly, and there's some more recent photos. That's all dead. There's been nothing on that, no leaves, no flowers, since 2016. And he believes it's the presence of the barrel-shaped object hovering above it which killed it, as if they sucked the life out of it. Now this is where you move forward from the gate, away from the gate, to another field nearby. We call it the second field. And what's interesting here now, what you see beyond this row of trees is what's called the third field. Now you see that's more or less where one of the points of the pyramid touched the ground or came very close to the ground. That's where you get the electrical discharge. And you can see these 2 trees are dead. They've been killed stone dead. The others are fine. Again, it's easier to see this when there's leaves on the trees in summer. But those trees have been dead. They were struck down dead in 2016. And that's more or less where, Gary believes that's where some of the discharge hit. Now, beyond in the field, there's a big bald patch where there's nothing growing. There's sort of short grass, but there's like rushes. There's long grass in the rest of the field. And there's no grass, there's no long grass at all in what's known as the bald patch. There's also some gorse bushes that are dead as well. And again, there's no sign of any burning. There's no sign that this is any kind of electrical discharge. But it's something else, maybe something we can't explain. But it does seem to have sucked the life out of what you see in front of you. Now, if you go along through the second field, you come to this gate and you look forward to another field, which is in the opposite direction to the south of the third field, which is to the north. Now, what happened was, the following day after this event happened, some strange people moved into that field and set up camp. They had big tents, all arranged in neat military rows, including, Kaz went walking around there and she saw they had some strange equipment set up. And they had some off-road vehicles like Land Rovers. And they had these big computers, like big laptops, which were that wide, and they were like opening them up on the bonnet of the Land Rover. I've seen photographs of these, and Kaz did show these photographs at Cornwall, when Neil, you can see it on Neil's video of her. And Kaz went walking around. These people just seemed to be up to something. And Kaz took her little dog for a walk, and they had a big guard dog there, which scared Kaz's little Jack Russell. She had to pick it up. And she warned these guys about, having a dog running around, because there's sheep in the area, it's lambing season, and the farmer could shoot the dog, but they didn't seem very concerned. Strange thing about these guys is some of them were wearing white boiler suits, which like police forensic teams wear. You know the things I mean? Scenes of crimes officers. Some of them had red jackets on. They had no insignia or anything on like that. But most alarming of all, some of them were armed. Kaz reports that some of them were holding like military assault rifles, and even those that weren't, Kaz said that the jacket was open of one, and she saw that he was tooled up. He had a pistol and a holster in a concealed carry position under his arm. And Kaz asked, "Who are you?" And they said, "We're a fracking survey team." Now, that's not possible. Firstly, the fracking survey guys don't come along with shooters on them. Secondly, fracking's a very controversial thing, and they wouldn't turn up unannounced. They'd have to give advance warning. There'd be security there because there'd be protesters. And also, they couldn't get their story straight because Kaz asked one of the others who they were, and he said, "Oh, we're from Vodafone." Do you ever meet anyone from Vodafone going out on jobs with guns? I suspect the appearance of these people is directly connected to the appearance of that UFO. What's interesting is these people, I mean, I suspect it's some kind of secret government department that is not officially announced in the Chancellor of the Exchequer's report. It's a black budget organisation. What's interesting is they seem to know what they were doing, as if they'd done it before. It's as if it was just one more job for them. This indicates it was an existing unit that had been set up specifically to deal with UFO situations that was already established and had been on other jobs before dealing with other UFO situations. Which means the government not only know about this happening, they know about this is a regular thing, and they have some people trained and ready to move in at a moment's notice when something like that happens. Very odd. In fact, there's signs that even as long ago as the Roswell incident of 1947, there are signs that was the case even back then, which indicates this is a long, ongoing, this relationship between the authorities of this Earth and these UFOs is a long-going one, and the cover-up, the secrecy surrounding them, is also it's been going on for a very long time. Now, this is the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. This is in Llantrisant. Now, Pentre is a small place, like a little village. There's about 8,000 people live there. Llantrisant is much bigger. It's quite a sizable town. It's also the home of the Royal Mint. There's a researcher called Richard D. Hall who was wrongly, I think, concluded that the Pentre incident is something to do with the Royal Mint, and there was some kind of drill there, some kind of exercise, and that was what actually happened. I think he's incorrect. This is the Royal Glamorgan Hospital in Llantrisant, and according to official sources, there was some kind of exercise there, some kind of military exercise in the area the night of the event. This is where Richard gets the idea it's something to do with the Royal Mint. Well, I'll tell you, as somebody, I was a hospital porter for 23 years. I was involved in a secondary role in several military exercises because the John Radcliffe in Oxford actually is involved with the Ministry of Defence, and indeed it's a forces hospital. We look after injured servicemen from the war, and those who've died are also kept there. And so we used to have to do things such as they'd land helicopters, the big Chinook transport helicopters, they'd half land them on the landing pad, so only one half of them was actually touching down, and things like that. And they basically, the army was continuously doing, the Royal Air Force were continuously doing drills with the hospital. Now, if there was any kind of military exercise in that area, there'd be a massive paper trail that would specifically date back before the event happened. Instead, all that Gary's been able to find, he's been fobbed off with basically, I forgot what the Latin phrase is, but basically it's known as backfilling. They're just simply bringing out information after, trying to make it look like it was there before. Kaz has also spoke to a number of members of staff there who remember the night this happened. There was loud explosions, including an explosion so loud and so strong that it shook the building. Now, you do not, in an exercise, detonate live ordnance near a hospital. There's special places like defence training estates which deal with things like that, which are up there. Some in Scotland, there's one at the Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire. These are specially designated area for doing live fire exercise. You don't do live fire exercises in the middle of a town. People end up getting killed. Indeed, someone could have done, because these explosions, I mean, they could interfere with if someone's in surgery or in intensive care or something. It could have caused all kinds of technical problems with the hospital, which could have led to people dying. So no way was that a military exercise. Another strange thing was, here's a little map of the area. I'll just tell you about this first. That's Pentre there. Cardiff is down here. It's Pentre there. There's Llantrisant, and you can see the Royal Glamorgan Hospital there. just northwest of Llantrisant. It's a few miles away. I believe that these two events are connected. They happened at the same time. Now, the arrow number 2 is pointing towards somewhere called Smilog Woods. First of all, I'll show you Smilog Woods. That Smilog Woods there, it's this big hill covered with forest. It looks very sinister, doesn't it? Very spooky. It's actually a lovely beauty spot. People go hiking up there. There's mountain bikers go up there. It's very popular with that sort of thing. Interestingly, if you just to the right of that, outside the frame, is what's known as Llantrisant Common. This is an area of basically a moorland just beside Llantrisant and the hospital and the Royal Mint. Now, unfortunately, it's become a bit of excrement hole, to put it politely, because it's very, very popular with fly tipping. People will dump all kinds of things there: off-road cars, rusty bicycles, old motorbikes, you name it. Mostly scrap metal. They'll just dump on there. And the local people, they're desperate. They're always saying, please, telling the local council, will you please clear this up? My dog cut his paw on something the other day. Things like that. And the council won't do anything about it. Well, I'll tell you what, the day after the Pentre incident, the army came along and they combed all of Llantrisant Common and they picked up all the scrap metal and they put it in a big pile along the side of the road. And it was cleared up. Then some lorries came away and took it away. There's obviously they were looking for debris of some kind. Something obviously was a forensic search. So if you have somewhere near your home which is dirty, needs cleaning up, you need to get a UFO to crash there, and then it'll all be sorted. This is inside Smilog Woods. Now, what you see here is a large clearing. Now, this was wood that was cleared in the few days following the Pentre incident. The whole area was sealed off, and a number of trees were felled and taken away. This was apparently because of larch disease. Now, larch disease is a very nasty disease of larch trees, which, if it appears in the wood, they will seal off the area and they'll get rid of some of the trees. Because if people walk, it can be carried, the germ can be carried on people's feet and on dogs' paws. It could be spread to other forests and things like that. So they want to keep people out of the area. The thing about it is, though, this was not a large disease felling operation, and Gary's looked into that. Definitely not. It was definitely not. There was no large disease there. That's an excuse. Gary believes, and I do, that something came down there. Some object came down there. This is a view from the other side of the clearing. There's some broken trees, as if something large crashed. There's also some heat effects as well, as if there was some kind of fire. Well, that's something that comes up in another case, which I'm going to talk about after this one as well. But you see here the trees were broken, and there's a large amount of topsoil was removed as well. It's tree stumps, things like that. It was all cleared off. This again was like what happened on Llantrisant Common. This was an attempt to search for some of the decisive physical evidence, which you also see at Roswell and other places like that whenever this sort of thing happens. Here's another view. It's another broken tree. Now, Gary tells me that's actually not, this tree, particular broken tree, was not caused by the event, but it's the kind of thing you see everywhere. These trees that are bent over and snapped. They're not cut, as you with a chainsaw, they're snapped. And they're everywhere around there. Okay, so, as I said, that's the Pentre UFO incident. I'm going to talk about another incident now. How am I doing for time, Neil?
About another 10 minutes, no, it's about 15 minutes to 9 o'clock.
Right you are. This is another incident I want to talk about, the Nottinghamshire Roswell. Now, I call it that. It's a name I came up with. It was originally called the Mansfield incident, or some people deny it was even an incident. It's, like I say, it's not a very well-known case, but I think it should be more well-known. And I call it, when I say the word Roswell, I'm referring to what you see with Pentre as well. That is, in ufological terms, it's a close encounter of the second kind with crash retrieval. And I call those Roswells. And we know about the Roswell incident, but you have like the Brazilian Roswell, the Russian Roswell, etc., etc. I think the word Roswell, which is the name of this town in New Mexico, near where this UFO crashed in 1947, sooner or later it's going to be entered into the Oxford English Dictionary as a common noun to refer to this kind of event. I think it really will be. This event happened in 1987. It happened on the 17th of October 1987, which was the day before the Great Storm. This hurricane that swept across the British Isles, causing enormous damage. I don't know if there's a connection there. It's just a thought. Now, this is an interesting book, a very difficult to get hold of, actually. I had to borrow a friend's copy when I was reading this for research. Magic Eyes Only, Earth's Encounters with Extraterrestrial Technology by Ryan S. Wood. Forward by the late, great Jim Mars, who sadly we no longer have. Magic, spelled like that, is short for Majestic 12, which is a supposed secret government department for dealing with UFO crash retrievals. This designates 100 cases between 1897 and the year 2000. It does date back to the late 19th century. That's almost one per year. If only 10% of these are true, then it appears UFO crashes are quite a regular thing. And what's more, the policy to cover them up, to put out a cover story about weather balloons and things like that, to seal off the area, remove the decisive physical evidence, it seems to be global. We are dealing with the situations where artifacts of extraterrestrial manufacture come to grief on the Earth's surface and are secretly salvaged. And this has been kept from us. This is a really appalling situation because this is proof we're not alone. There's also what we can learn from these, from the debris, from what we retrieve, this evidence. What it can teach us is quite incredible. And I've done an entire presentation on that. We're talking about things such as technology that could improve life on Earth enormously. But that's a story for another time. Now, the story of the Nottinghamshire Roswell is not mentioned in that book. So I think I'm the first person to widely publicise this, certainly in the last few years. But it was mentioned in Nexus magazine in 1997. How many of you read Nexus magazine? Oh, great, good for you. Honestly, if you enjoy this event, these meetings, you will love this magazine. It's still going today. It's really good. It covers all the kinds of stories that we talk about here. It's a magazine based in Australia, but it's published here in Britain. And it talks about this event. There was a guy called Harry Mason who wrote an article about this. Now, the article was based on a magazine called Encounters. It's called Skywatch, and it's Skywatch Encounters, which was an e-zine. It was a first-generation e-zine before the World Wide Web. It was actually on Usenet, or one of these early precursors to the Triple W. And it was edited by a guy called John King, who I actually know. He's written several books about Princess Diana and her murder. And he edited this. And this is where it all came out, in 1997. So in 1987 it happened, 1997 it was published. What happened was on the 17th and 19th, the 17th of October 1987, the people of the area just to the north of Nottingham, the Ashfield district, Kirkby and Ashfield, that area, were awoken by a huge explosion. Again, this is something you get with the Bedouin Mountains incident. Have you heard of that one? That's in Wales as well. And they saw strange lights in the sky wheeling around the place. Now, we know one of the witnesses, actually, interestingly, who's come forward about this, is an insurance broker. One of them is an insurance broker, another is a television repairman. Because the insurance companies were inundated with claims by damage done to their people's houses. Because this explosion was so loud and so violent, it actually did damage. It smashed windows, it knocked tiles off roofs and things like that. There were no fatalities as far as I know. But there also appears to be some kind of electromagnetic pulse because people's TV sets were breaking down. And also VCRs, video cassette recorders in particular, were badly affected, and videotapes. And anyone younger than me, just for your information, because you don't know what those things are, do you? What's a video, Neil? A videotape. Oh, can you imagine Netflix in a black plastic brick? Right, that's a video. Got it, kids? But anyway, these were all breaking down. And so the local repair shop was inundated with calls. And it seems the water was cut off. One of the researchers I spoke to remembers it well. He was a child at that time, but he remembers it very well. And he said that there was like bowsers being brought around with water so people could drink, a bit like in the 1976 drought, in the heat wave then. Now this is the area most really affected here. This red circle encompasses people. It's today called the Nottingham conurbation. Now that term wasn't used in those days. It refers to the city of Nottingham and large towns all around it. But this circle, 11,000 people lived in that area in 1987, probably more now. But that's Mansfield, a large town to the north of Nottingham. There's Kirkby and Ashfield. There's several other large towns here. There's Ravenshead, etc. And what happened was the lights travelled from a northeasterly to southwesterly direction. They started here to the east of Mansfield in Sherwood Forest. They were seen over Sherwood Forest of Robin Hood fame. And they travelled southwest to an area called the Misk Hills, which is just south of Mansfield. It's a local beauty spot. And that's where all the action happened. Now what happened was, just 3/4 of an hour, at about 2:15 in the morning, after the incident happened, because the incident happened about 1:30 a.m., helicopters were seen buzzing around overhead, shining lights down at the ground. It's something that happens an awful lot. The police do it nowadays. But back then it was very rare. But what's interesting, it was the speed with which the response came about. And the only way the government could have responded that quickly is if they had the RAF and the army in position ready to go. Again, not at the actual spot, but in the local area. As if, again, they knew in advance something was going to happen. How do they know? That's a big question. Anyway, this is the Nottingham Post. The Truth is out there near Mansfield. It refers to this event. It covers the basics. I learned an awful lot more from this. But it lasted a week. For a week, the whole area was in chaos. It was like with Roswell. A large area was sealed off. And the army was there. The police had roadblocks everywhere. It was pretty chaotic. I mean, the A60, which is the main road between Nottingham and Mansfield, that thoroughfare is the principal artery of transport between the two large settlements. That was closed. And I spoke to a guy actually in 2016 who was a lorry driver in that area, and he remembers distinctly being stuck for hours in traffic jams as the traffic was diverted around Blidderth, which is a small town to the east of that area. And so all that traffic between Nottingham and Manchester had to go around these little villages, and it took hours to get through because of the traffic jams. This is Thieves Wood. This is the area to the south of Nottingham, which is the centrepiece of one of these particular... There were two main sites of this particular incident, which I'll describe. Thieves Wood, this is Forestry Commission land to the south of Mansfield. There's the A60 going up the middle of it. And when I heard about this, I took a little trip with a local researcher. And we went to the northeast of that area. You see it's the northeast of the woods to have a look around. We knocked on some people's doors because there were some houses there. And they don't remember anything happened. They don't remember anything strange happening themselves. We did knock on a couple of doors. But I was contacted by a guy, when I made a video about this, little video documentary, I was contacted by a man who told me, no, you're looking in the wrong place. The place where the crash happened is there. Do you see there's a little square spot here? I'll show you in more detail in a minute. There's a little square cutout area of trees. Well, that's where it happened. That's where the thing came down. Now, the guy who contacted me, these are the two ufologists, local ufologists in the area, who've been absolutely invaluable. These are the guys who did the research back a long time ago. And they've been basically waiting for someone to take them seriously. Nigel Crowley, that's the guy who... Oh, who's that? Is that GCHQ? Oh, God, they're not sending the cops round, are they? Oh, dearie me. If the men in black turn up, tell them we're here with the Women's Institute or something. Now, that's Nigel Crowley on the right. He's a local ufologist. He's the guy who contacted me and told me where the crash site was. On the left, that's Daniel Bostock. He's another ufologist who I first worked with on my original expedition into the area. These two guys have been invaluable in getting this research out to you today. Now, this is the area that was sealed off. It's a big triangular-shaped segment. This was closed for an entire week. The A60 included. That down there is Ravenshead, and onto the left is Kirkby and Ashfield. And so that's west, that goes up to Mansfield, that's the West Nottinghamshire College there at the top. That whole area was sealed off. Now, Dan Bostock, he actually told me that he remembers the BBC were reporting on the radio that a helicopter had crashed there on the first day. That doesn't make sense, because it went on for a whole week. You wouldn't need to seal off a huge area like that for a helicopter crash. You wouldn't need massive army roadblocks for a whole week. You need a bobby on the beat and some tape around it, wouldn't you? Here's a closer look at the crash site. I do think that's what it was. This is the first crash site in Thieves Wood where the object struck the ground before taking to the air briefly once more before coming to rest at the Warren. I'll explain all that more about that in a minute. But this square segment here is about 600 feet by 300 feet. It's in the middle of the woods. And so there's some very, very strange features there. which indicates something odd happened there a while ago. Now, I went there with Dan and Nigel, took me there. We went on an expedition. Now, the first thing you see when you look at this particular clearing is there are no large trees or bushes in the area. Now, you see in the background there's some larger trees, and there were some few bare stumps, so I counted rings, and these are 50 to 60 years old, which means the large mature trees were there at the time of this disaster. In the actual location, in the clearing, there are no large trees. Now, there is, according to Dan and Nigel, for many years, nothing grew there. It was completely and utterly bare, but now it looks like things have started to recover. We see bushes, we have some grass and things like that. But apparently what happened was the army removed massive amount of topsoil. Tons and tons of topsoil were removed. Now, there may be several reasons for this. It could be that they were concerned about alien diseases, you know. We don't want an event like The Thing coming about, do we? That famous film by John Carpenter. Alternatively, they may have been looking for small pieces of wreckage, which again, we saw this at Roswell. Anyway, they replaced the topsoil with a huge amount of sand. And indeed, you can see that because the soil in the clearing is of a different consistency. It's very sandy. There were some molehills, which indicated that you could see the different colour in the soil. I actually took a control sample in the rest of the wood, and you can see it's much darker. It's a different consistency, which indicates that many tons of sand were dumped onto this area. It's recovering now. I mean, in maybe 10 or 20 years, you won't be able to see that anything happened there. But it's very clear something strange happened there. This is a fence, and I don't know how old that is, but a fence is built along the bottom of this clearing. And the clearing actually slopes down in the middle as if there was like something dug out in the middle of it. It's very strange. That fence runs along the bottom. Very odd indeed. Now, what's happened next is this story does not end with that particular event, because I say that's a crash site, but that's not where the object, whatever it was, and we don't know how big it is. It's obviously quite a size because it did a lot of damage. There was a big fire there apparently, so there were some heat effects, but it managed to get back into the air. It hit the ground and bounced and got back into the air. It flew on for a bit further and landed at a place called the Warren, which is in the far bottom left there of this particular map. And that's where the story continues, but I think we'll have to wait till after the break now. It's time to take a break. But there are two sides to this. And so I'll be telling you more about that when I come back. But thank you very much.
Okay, for the minute, thanks very much to Ben.
Thank you.
So far. So if everyone's chilling out for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, we'll get a drink or whatever.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have your attention, please. Thank you. Now, as I was saying before, this is a very unusual kind of crash retrieval because it is two sites. So there were two crash sites. One appears there's nothing actually landed there and stayed there. There may well have been some damage, which is why they confiscated the topsoil. But the object took off from Thieves Wood and it travelled a few more miles. We don't know the exact route, but there's the Hollymile golf course there. And then we come down here and it landed at a place called the Warren. And here's like an expanded image of the Warren. Now, just so you know, there is Annesley Hall. You can see there where I'm pointing there. Annesley Hall is an old stately home. It was built in a number of phases between the 13th and 19th century. The 19th century building is the only one that's really still standing and is in any real state of existence. The older buildings are now derelict. It belongs to the Chaworth family, who were the original sheriffs of Nottingham, interestingly. They lost it in a poker game or something like that, I don't know. But it is a listed building. Now, the Annesley Hall estate is very carefully guarded by security, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But you can see here this crescent-shaped road, and there's like an industrial estate or shopping area there, and it comes along here and it joins the M1 motorway. The M1 motorway is the longest motorway in Britain, goes all the way from London to Yorkshire. It passes through this area, and that's junction 27 of the M1. Now, strangely enough, and I don't know if there's a connection here, but there's an old nuclear bunker just on that crescent-shaped road. And I actually saw it. I actually filmed there. It's now closed, but in 1987 it would have been open because that was not quite at the end of the Cold War. it would have been active. Now, what Nigel and Dan believed happened is the object came to rest here at this place called the Warren. Now, this is, you can see here, what you have is a patch of trees. There's a little pond in there with this fish. And there was there used to be a problem with poaching there, and that's how the guys know about it. But you see, where it actually touched down, you can see that the ground is discoloured. Don't know if you can see the patch of darker colour in the middle of the field. That's an arable field, it's a farmland, it's used for, for farming today. What's odd is I've searched the area for miles around, looking for another patch of discoloured ground like that, and I can't find one. It appears that the object seemed to have some kind of permanent effect on the land where it landed. And you see the same thing with the ball patch at Pentre as well. Now, funny enough, in the Rendlesham Forest incident, something similar happened. There's a patch of land which also has been affected by the presence of UFO in Cable Green, the film, which is the patch of, it's actually the field, the farmer's field, at the side of the forest, where a lot of the action happened on one of the nights of the incident. A guy called Larry Warren, who's a witness, he's the principal witness to this event, actually saw something strange happen there. And Peter Robbins, another researcher, has actually investigated and done forensic evidence tests on that soil and found strange anomalies. It's a long story, but it'd be interesting to see if we can get the same thing with this particular incident. Now, what I did was I actually took a little trip here, so I'll go back to the map. We parked near the bunker, and we walked up Dog and Bear Lane, which is this is Dog and Bear Lane. It's just a footpath that links these two roads together. And you can get a good view of Annesley Hall. You can't actually get onto the estate because security is very tight. And I think that in itself is very, very odd. Now, this is one of the older buildings of Annesley Hall. It's a derelict now. And this is looking across from Dog and Bear Lane out the old building there. Now, what's odd is the security. They've got these security guards here. I'll show you one of them more in a minute. Now, we walked a bit further up Dog and Bear Lane, and this is Nigel's hand there, pointing towards the Warren. Now, the Warren is, you can't actually see the discoloration from ground level. It only appears from aerial shots, and as you saw there on Google Earth. But it's basically in front of the trees at the background, and it's actually in front of those, and behind the trees nearby. This here is a big patch of gravel in the foreground. That is where we believe the UFO finally came to rest in 1987. That's where all the attention was. This whole area was sealed off. Now, I mentioned security. While we were walking up, this happened while we were there, this car drove up. Now, you might have seen it, you might have actually seen it, I've only just noticed this. You can actually see a car in the earlier photo of Annesley Hall. It's very, very small. You can only see it if you examine the photo closely. This is actually at the new building, closer to Dog and Bear Lane. But this car pulled up, and its window wound down, and there were two men in the car staring at us. Now, there's a patch on the side of the car, which is the livery of the car, which actually is the emblem of the Land Management Agency, which runs Annesley Hall. These people are nominally, they're gamekeepers, supposedly, to keep poachers away. And yet there used to be a problem with poaching in that area, but it's not anymore. These guys patrol the area 24/7, and Annesley Hall is strictly private property. And according to Dan and Nigel, that only happened after 1987. These people, we were on public land, we were on a public footpath, we were walking up there looking at the estate, and they could see we had cameras, and they came and watched us to see what we were doing. Now, Nigel has phoned up the Land Management Agency to ask about this, and they refused to take his questions. They put the phone down on him. He wanted to phone up and ask about an incident that took place there in October 1987. They immediately ended the call. Why would they do that? They're a public-facing company. Why would they refuse to discuss something which they didn't? It's weird because if this was all nonsense, they would go, hey, what are you talking about? What UFO? Hey? We don't know anything about any UFO. But they didn't do that. They just stopped. They just put the phone down. Very strange indeed. Security, very tight. These gamekeepers are not there to protect the place from poachers. I think they're designed to keep onlookers like me away. Now, this is the area that Nigel and Dan believe was sealed off during the incident. Now, junction 27 there was closed when you basically the junction that leads off there. This crescent-shaped road was all shut. And you can see the line going to Linby there, to the east, and then south to Hucknall, which is just north of Nottingham. Now, the M1 motorway was not shut during that time period. I mean, it would be very, obviously, it's a major thoroughfare. The M1 was shut for a week. Everyone would know about it. The M1 was actually not shut. Now, the question was, because you can see the Annesley Hall estate is actually it's right next to the M1. So we wondered about whether that was a security risk for the people who were doing the crash retrieval. So Nigel, Dan and I got in a car and we took a little drive up the M1 and down again from junction 27 to the next one to see if we could see into the Annesley Hall estate from there. And you can't. There's large trees blocking the view. Now, these trees could have been transplanted there since 1987. They're obviously older than that. Maybe put there because of carbon offsetting laws or green belt laws or something like that. But it's quite likely they were actually growing there at the time, and they provided enough concealment for Annesley Hall that shutting the motorway was not necessary. That's our guess anyway. That area was completely sealed off. Again, exactly like the Thievewood site. The army was there, the police, roadblocks. You couldn't go in, you couldn't go out. Very, very intensive. Another thing, this is another similarity to the Pentre incident. These trees, as I said, they're 50 to 60 years old. These mature trees were there at the time. They've suffered what looks like damage due to exposure to heat or radiation. Now we don't have the ability to confirm that, but we would like to get a dendrologist or whatever they're called, a tree surgeon on the case, and maybe they can answer. That's an ongoing research project that we have at the moment. It's a really, really strange situation. But the Thievewood, the Annesley Hall site, as I said, is completely sealed off. To this day, you can't get on there because of the gamekeepers. So getting soil samples, and we'd have to go in there at night, I suppose, and risk being nabbed by them. But the Thievewood site is open to the Thievewood site is completely open to the public. You can go in there anytime you like, and you can examine this location yourself. It's very easy to get there. Now, someone actually asked me about this during the break. UFO crash retrievals. Now, this is an interesting image. I just Googled UFO crash in a city, and I got this. This is an image from a game called Grand Theft Auto 5. Now, I'm not a gamer, as they call them, so I've never played this. I might do it just because of this to find out what this is all about. But what you see here is you actually see a flying saucer that has crashed at a crossroads here, and right in the middle of a city. Now, one thing the skeptics say, they always say this, but in a sense to discredit issues to do like with the Roswell incident and other similar issues. They go, these UFOs, why won't they crash in the middle of a city? Why is it always the Devil's Armpit, Nevada, or some Welsh hillside, or somewhere where there's no one around to see it? Why won't they crash in the middle of a city where everyone can see it and it can't be covered up, and it's in no doubt that's what's happened? Well, there's two answers to that. The first thing is that it's highly unlikely UFOs would crash in a city, because if you look at the entire Earth, now, the Earth, you think there's a lot of people in the Earth, isn't there? There's 7 billion of us. I don't know who counts them. I don't know. It must be a quite hell of a job. But there are 7 billion people on the world. You think to yourself, well, that's an awful lot of people. But it's actually not that many if you look at the size of the Earth, and also you look at our population distribution. Because even though there's an awful lot of people in the world, we tend to be concentrated in small areas. And in fact, human habitation is actually quite rare on Earth. Now, what I mean to say is, like, if you look at the entire Earth, this is what a UFO would actually be dealing with coming down to Earth. It wouldn't deliberately go for areas of human population if it was crashing. It would just crash anywhere on the Earth. Well, almost 3/4 of the Earth's surface is covered by water, the sea. Of the remaining quarter, or just over half of it is almost completely uninhabited. It's either too cold or too hot, there's no water, you can't keep warm, you can't keep cool. There's also all kinds of other reasons why, for economic and geographical and practical purposes, you can't have large centres of human population. In the areas of the land where it is actually possible for humans to live, we do occupy those lands, but we tend to live quite closely packed in cities and towns, the urban areas. Now, those urban areas account for less than 1% of the entire Earth's surface. Big cities like this, or High Wycombe, or Oxford, or London, that's less than 1%. So in terms of crash retrievals, if there was 100 in the last century, it's actually pretty unlikely that, given the entire Earth, you would actually get a crash in the city. That's one answer. The second answer to the question is, well, why do they never crash in cities? is that they do. The Nottingham conurbation itself is a patchwork of farmland, forest and large towns such as Kirkby and Ashfield, Ravenshead. These are large, highly populated towns in that area. There's 11,000 people in that area. Not only that, but there's been other instances where Roswell type events happen in populated areas. Are you familiar with the Varginha incident of 1996? Anyone heard of that one? It's an incident in Brazil, at a place called Varginha, which is a city of 100,000 people. And a UFO crashed just outside that city. But everyone in the city, it was amazing, there were aliens wandering the streets. And I've looked into this case in detail, and I believe that it was real aliens were found wandering the streets. Extremely odd. And you may think, well, of course, if something like this happened, like they couldn't cover it up. As the skeptics say, well, if it happened in the middle of the city, then no one would be any doubt they couldn't cover that up, could they? Well, it's a very, very sad and very uncomfortable thought to answer that question. Well, maybe yes, they could. It's a bit of a. This is about human psychology and culture, which is a dark side of ourselves that it's difficult to face. Supposing, for example, you were walking through the streets of your hometown and you saw something like this. A flying saucer, it's from another world, crashed at the crossroads. So you went home to tell your family, I've just seen a UFO crashed in the crossroads. And by then, of course, the police would have sealed it all off so no one could go in. And then the news comes on and you expect to hear about how an alien spacecraft has crashed in your city. And then the newsreader comes on and says, something very, very strange happened in the middle of High Wycombe today. A children's bouncy castle that was shaped like a flying saucer flew away in the wind. Luckily, there were no kids in it and landed right in the middle of a crossroads. The police have sealed off the area because, well, at the very, very same time, there was a gas leak at the very moment. And so they had to seal the area off, and it might be a few days before they can open it again. Now, personally, I wouldn't buy that. Would you? Because you people in this room, you wouldn't buy that. But how many other people would? How many other people would actually, even they would actually deny the experience of their own senses and what they saw themselves? They would say, oh, I must have been mistaken because the news has told me otherwise. And the news never lies, does it? It's a sad fact, but I think if the government successfully covered up the Nottinghamshire Roswell, if they can cover it up there and they covered up Virginia, why couldn't they cover up this? I think they could. Now, Harry Mason, when he wrote he originally wrote the article for Nexus, which is based on the work of John King, as I said earlier, he speculated that the Mansfield incident, as they called it back then, might be the test of some kind of secret weapon. He didn't say it was a UFO. He thought it might be some kind of secret weapon or aircraft. And that was basically what caused all the fuss. Now, that is possible, but there were a few problems with that story. First of all, if you were testing some kind of secret aircraft or weapon, you wouldn't do it over a populated area. That's what places like Area 51 are for. They're remote areas out of the way where no one can see you, and you can do these things privately. That's the whole point of them. That's the same for the people who... In fact, there's lots of UFO incidents that people say might possibly be secret government technology, and it doesn't quite fit for this reason. The Pentre incident, for example, was over South Wales. Again, it seems strange that they would do that over that particular area. In this case, it was near Nottingham, a big city. Why would you test a secret weapon there? Now, what if it wasn't one of ours? What if it was them pesky Russians? And I hear a lot about Russians nowadays, hacking elections and doing things like that, and poisoning people. Spraying people with poison in Salisbury. But look, this is like, let's go back to the Cold War. Now, this was 1987. Yes, the Soviet Union still existed, but things were very, very different. Do you recognize this guy? It's Mikhail Gorbachev. Yeah, this man was the last president of the Soviet Union. Now, when he came to power in 1984, he immediately set about a series of reforms that he called perestroika and glasnost, which means restructuring and openness. He wanted to change the Soviet Union into a new kind of country, one that could exist in the modern world, because he knew that the system they had at the time was doomed. He knew that. He had the foresight, unlike many other Soviet politicians, to realise that the socialist system that they'd set up could not continue existing. Now, he failed in this, or he succeeded too well, depending on how you look at it. Because of course, this led to the downfall of the entire Soviet Union. Indeed, in 1991, it was officially disbanded and turned into the modern Russian Federation. And Boris Yeltsin came in and replaced him. The interesting thing was, though, as part of his perestroika glasnost policy, was a rapprochement over the Cold War. So essentially, he was suggesting an armistice of the Cold War, which meant he basically wanted to end it. And indeed, he did this by holding a number of nuclear arms limitation talks and things like this with his Cold War rivals, which was the United States, but also Great Britain. The Prime Minister through the 1980s was Margaret Thatcher. She was Prime Minister for the entire period. And she and Mikhail Gorbachev became good friends. In fact, when she died a few years ago, he attended her funeral. He was there to pay his final respects to her. It's inconceivable. And if it had been the 1950s or 60s, maybe I could understand that the Soviets might have wanted to carry out some kind of attack, even use a covert weapon on their Cold War enemy. But in 1987, under Gorbachev, no. I think it's very, very unlikely that would have happened. Now, we've got to think logically. This is a good image of logic here. Now, the skeptics love logic. They say they love empiricism and science and reason, but they're actually very bad at that kind of thing. And I've done an entire presentation all about that, which I actually did here.
There's other example, climate change.
Yeah, there's many other examples. Of course, yeah.
A 9-year-old.
Yeah. It is, yes, exactly. I've done an entire presentation about the skeptics. Now, the thing about it is, though, like one of the great fictional skeptics of the world was Sherlock Holmes, created by Arthur Conan Doyle. And he said something very interesting in one of his books, one of his adventures. He said, when you've eliminated all other possibilities, whatever you have left must be the truth. So it was not a helicopter crash. It wasn't a weather balloon. It wasn't a weapon of any kinds. It wasn't any of those things. So what's left? It was the Nottinghamshire Roswell was caused by an artifact of an extraterrestrial civilization, a non-human intelligence. That is by far the most likely explanation for what we saw, what happened on that day. And the same goes for the other UFO events I've discussed. So the United Kingdom is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. As I said, this hotbed of UFO activity. It's an actual treasure house on global standards of this particular phenomenon. So much so that I think UK should be reversed to KU, which stands for Kingdom of UFOs. That, I think, is what we should call it. Now, if you like UFOs, you'll love these books that I've got here. Now, this is what I've done was I've thought about the disclosure issue, and I decided to write a fictional account of what would happen if there was a disclosure. And it resulted in the book Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure. And I enjoyed that. So I know other people have read it and they really, really like it. And by the end of that story, I realised I was going to have to carry it on. So I wrote a sequel, Roswell Revealed, a world after disclosure. So I carried the story on. And then at the end of that book, it was going so well, I had to write a third one, Roswell Redeemed, Humanity After Disclosure, and make it a trilogy. I've sold out of this one today, unfortunately, but I do have copies. I've got one copy of Roswell Rising and 3 of Roswell Revealed. So if you like they're £10 each, these books, or you can have both of them for 15, and I'll sign them for you. And the third one I don't have, but you can get it on Amazon and anywhere, any bookshop you can get it from. So please do come and select one while you can. And I want to thank you all for listening. But we still have plenty of time, don't we? So I think we've got time for some questions. Does anyone have a question? Andy?
I missed the first little part of your speech, Ben, but have you personally seen a UFO yourself? And if so, explain.
About a dozen times I've seen things in the sky that I can't explain. I think there's 3 that really defy explanation. I mean, actively defy explanation. What I mean to say is I see them quite clearly. And if they were like a weather balloon or a kite or a plane, I'd be able to see that's what they were. One of the most interesting happened in 2008 in Oxford. I saw a circular white object in the sky. And it was on a windy day. I thought it was a balloon at first, but it wasn't moving. It was just hanging there in the sky on a windy day. And it kept going behind the clouds. And it was at like a 45-degree elevation, which means it must have been of some considerable size. And then one of the clouds went in front of it, and when it went away, the thing had disappeared. That was very interesting, that, yeah. And it was daylight. It was as a daylight, and it was a white spherical object like a golf ball in the sky. It was probably about apparent size about a quarter of the full moon. Very interesting indeed.
And what was the other two incidents?
I saw lights in the sky at. I was at the beach at Lytham St Anne's, Lancashire, and I saw lights flicking around the sky like big fireflies, and they were high up. And I saw something similar when I was visiting some friends in Lincolnshire, and I saw the same thing. I saw like a wheel of light going like that. I thought it was very strange. I don't know what those things are. I don't know how to explain those things. I can't explain them. Anybody else, sir?
The ships, or spaceships, or where they are they man-made, or ET, or some question being that sometimes it could be a time machine in the future?
Yeah, I mean, as far as man-made things goes, I believe humans can create aircraft and spacecraft far more advanced than any that are publicly available. Things such as Concorde, rockets, a space shuttle, these are way below what the secret space program has. And indeed secret aviation, secret military has. So some UFO instance could be explained as secret government technology. As for time machines, now time travel is a tricky thing because it appears that travelling backwards in time is actually not possible. You can travel forwards in time using Einstein's theory of relativity. Simply by travelling very fast, you go forward in time. Travelling backwards in time can be done, but only through the illusion of time travel using the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's the idea that there is more than one universe. In fact, there's a huge number of universes, and that you can actually create the experience of time travel by visiting one of these universes, which is identical or even closely resembles Earth's own past. And because every single possibility is played out in every universe, basically, wherever you go, you're going to find something, because every single thing that can happen does happen in this multiverse, this many worlds interpretation. So I believe that some UFOs are actually from other worlds rather than from other planets. They come here from the other universes through hyperspatial portals. As you mentioned, ET, yes, of course, some of them are. I think some of them come from other planets. They're probably more than one phenomenon. We probably maybe categorized them together as more than one phenomenon. Yeah, so, yes.
Can I have a chat with you after about things that I've been seeing?
Yes,
in
certainly.
my garden?
Yes, certainly.
Just one word about Plan ET.
Yes, Plan ET. It's a plan of the... That's a good one, yeah.
Etymology does not lie. Neither do numbers.
Ben, have you had the harassment team circus around you as well?
Oh yes, very much so. I've been speaking to a couple of people about trolls and about internet abuse.
Have you had the things like the helicopters, the flashing headlights, all that kind of stuff?
No, I haven't. I've been attacked online very brutally over many years. I've not actually had, apart from that strange phone call, that's the only time I could say that I was harassed in the real world. Again, although my discharge from the hospital porting service in the NHS, that was suspicious too. That was suspicious, I must say. Yeah. But anyone else? Yes, hello?
What shape is the planet?
Round. Round. Honestly, I talk to flat earthers all the time. I mean, I know people who just block them as soon as they see them, and they just block them. I'm willing to talk to them. I've done a radio show all about the flat Earth actually, because it was a popular request from my listeners. So I did a show about flat Earth. I invited Mark Sargent on, who's one of the biggest flatties in the world, and he did an interview with me. It was very interesting. I wasn't convinced, but it is round, I believe. Yeah, it's not everything's a conspiracy.
Was there a delay when he came over Skype?
Oh, there was. He was a nice chap actually. Yeah, but I think he's completely wrong. But,
Well, actually, in the many worlds interpretation theory, you could have a flat Earth as well as a round Earth.
yeah, I mean, there must be some universe where somehow that happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look into it.
Any more questions before we?
Anybody else? Hello.
Researching the picture, the first picture you showed, the one with the beam behind the gap.
Yeah.
Have you seen the third picture?
Yeah. I've seen first, and I've seen the three. They're all pretty much the same, apart because he took them very closely together, literally within seconds of each other. And then it's only in the second one you see the strange entity. It's known as the Solway Firth spaceman. It was a news headlines for a while.
Yeah, I tried to see the other ones. I never found it online.
Oh, there are some. There are some. It's. I'll try. I don't know if there's. I saw it on a website. There were like 3 pictures, and there was 2 without the alien. Yeah. Hello, sir.
Is it true? I remember reading somewhere about 12 years ago about the. Do you know what DOMs are?
Deep underground military bases.
Well,
Yes.
there was apparently. I'm pretty sure that they. I'm not looking at the detail, but there was apparently a one in Wales somewhere. So about the incident you were talking about, there's somewhere around the Beacon Beacon tells it.
Yeah. There are several.
Then you can easily go to basin.
There were rumours of these bases existing in many places. I mean.
I know Denver Airport is about
Yeah.
most famous, but there was rumours of one in Wales, which could be related to the incident you were.
There was a guy called Tony Dodd who was talking about that. He's dead now, but he was talking about the possibility of some kind of secret operation of some kind in South Wales. Yeah.
Was there a guy called King, Barry King or something like that? What's your view on him?
He claims to have been a security guard of a base in Berkshire, beneath the village of Peasmore. It's 600 feet down, and it's beneath the village of Peasmore. I'm not sure what to make of that. I mean, I actually visited the area looking for evidence. I did find a couple of strange things. He's done a number of videos with Miles Johnson on the Bases project. And I don't know. I can't be certain about what's. It's a tough one. That I don't know exactly. But I've watched the videos. You mean? He sounds credible actually, but it's the problem is finding evidence. I did find some strange things. One of the places he said there was an entrance to this base, I did find some strange things that weren't marked on maps, which I thought was a bit odd.
Okay, I think that's it. So, just like to say thank you.
Thank you very much.
Indeed.
Many appreciated.
If you want to buy a copy of Ben's book, you've only got one.
It's one of the first copy.
So
Yeah.
if you want one and one, there's only one person that's going to get that deal tonight, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. £15 for 2.